Okay, now we're going to expand upon what traits can be passed on and what traits cannot. So we are still on Learning Target 30. How are some traits passed on to the next generation? So now we're going to go into a little bit more detail on how traits are passed on and why some traits do not get passed on. So heredity is the study of passing of traits from one parent to offspring. And yep, that's the stuff. Okay, Mendel is called the father of genetics. He studied pea plants and he learned how traits are inherited. He found out that each sex cell carries one allele. When put together, they code for a gene. So, what we just talked about with the dominant recessive. So, when we look at those alleles, we have two ways to describe alleles. Alleles that have the letters, which we've used before at the dominant recessive, one upper and one lowercase, is called a genotype. It's the genetic makeup. So when you inherit traits and you've got a certain allele from mom, a certain allele from dad, that's your genotype. The phenotype is the actual trait that occurs based on your genotype. So if your trait is brown eyes, it's based off a certain genotype. Now, to determine how some traits are passed on and how some traits aren't, we use Punnett squares. So Punnett squares are basically a way of mapping what percentage genes are going to get passed on, or traits are going to be passed on. So what you always do is you create a 4 squares, and at the top you put the alleles from mom and dad. So it doesn't matter which one's which, but the allele from one sex is up here, big G, little g. The alleles from another parent are down here. Then you match them up. So if you take a look, this first one, big G, you're going to put that in the first box. Okay, so that's two dominant traits. So the big G stands for the color green for this plant. So this plant will be the color green. Then, okay, you look at the next one. So you look at big G in this row, little g. So that's what you put in next. So the offspring could have a big G, little g. Again, because it's paired with the big G, the little g doesn't show up, so you have a green plant. Or green bean. Green bean. I'm sorry, I keep saying plant, but it's a bean. Bean is a plant. Okay, then you go down below and you match them up. And we always put the uppercase letter first, just so you know. So big G, little g. So now we've got another big G, little g. And again, since the dominant's paired with the recessive, the dominant color shows up, so we have a green P. Okay, then you've got the last one, which is little g, little g. Okay, so little g, when those pair up, that actually gives you the recessive gene of, it looks like maybe yellow. Okay, so now we're going to start talking about the percentages. So this is going to tell you what percent certain traits are going to get passed on to the offspring. Okay, so then you can calculate the percentage of what traits an offspring can have from their two parents. So if you take a look at the green pea plants, they have a 3 out of 4 chance of the offspring being the color green. So it's a 75% chance of having green pea plants. 1 out of 4 will be yellow, 25% chance. So we use Punnett squares to calculate the probability of receiving certain traits based on your parents' genotype. Okay, another way that traits can be inherited is through incomplete dominance. So that means neither allele is dominant or recessive. They both show up. So, for example, the flower color red and white. If you mix a red and white flower, neither the red color or the white color is dominant or recessive, so they both show up and you get a mixture called pink. The same way works with a chestnut horse and a white horse. Neither one are dominant, so they turn into kind of a brown, kind of a light tan color called a Palomino horse. And this is an example of incomplete dominance with the flower color. Okay, another way traits can be inherited are through multiple alleles. So far we've been talking about alleles that are controlled by just two alleles, like getting one uppercase, one lower, those being only the two alleles. Well, multiple alleles are controlled by more than two alleles. So you can only inherit two alleles, but you have more options. For example, for blood type is controlled by three alleles, A, B, and O. Now, you don't inherit three alleles. You still inherit one allele from mom, one allele from dad, but you just have more options than just either dominant or recessive. You now have a combination. So now we have four outcomes with these alleles. You could have blood type AB, you could have blood type A, blood type B, or blood type O. And then another way that traits can be inherited is through polyogenetic inheritance. This means traits are controlled by more than one gene. So hair color, eye color, skin color are all controlled by more than one gene. And let me give you an example. Okay, so when we talk about traits that are controlled by more than one gene, we're looking at so instead of just looking at two alleles coding for a trait, you have to look for more than one allele, more than one set of alleles. So we did this in our lab with our baby genetics. So with skin color, I believe in the lab there were actually 6 sets of alleles that you had to look at to determine what color skin you had, and then same thing with eye color. So these are examples of traits that are inherited by more than one pair of alleles. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about are traits that are inherited on your X and Y chromosomes. These are called sex-linked traits. Remember, X and Y chromosomes are the chromosomes that determine gender. For females, you have to have 2 X's. For males, it's an XY. And remember, a female will always donate an X allele. The male is actually the one who determines whether the gender of a baby. So the male will either donate an X allele or a Y allele. Okay? So what you can have is you can have traits that are inherited only on your X and Y chromosomes. Color blindness is one of those. Color blindness is inherited on the X chromosome. So if you see this symbol XC, that XC stands for color blindness. So that means that trait is on the X chromosome. Now, in order for a person to be colorblind, they have to have, for females, they have to have 2 X's with the C's. They will, because color blindness is considered a recessive trait unless it's paired with 2. So if you have a normal X and an X with a C, the normal X is considered dominant, so the color blindness will not show up. Now on males, because they don't have another X, they have a Y, if they get the XC, it shows up. So males are more likely to be colorblind than females. Because if a female can be what we call, this is called a carrier. So a female can carry the trait for color blindness and not be colorblind. But a female will also have a 50 chance of passing on color blindness to a male offspring. So again, if you look at this Punnett square, 50% chance for females to be colorblind, 50% male. Now, most of the time, you don't get this. Most of the time, let me change it up and I'll show you a different example. Okay, if we do another example where we assume that the male does not have is not colorblind, but the female is still a carrier, then you get a different probability. You now have a probability that 100% of the females will be normal. Okay, so we have normal, and then this one is a carrier. 50% of the females can be carriers, but neither one of the female will be colorblind. So the only way a female can be colorblind is for the mom, and the dad has to be colorblind, and the mom has to either be a carrier or colorblind as well. But if you look, there's a 50% chance that a male offspring will be colorblind. So a male has a 50% chance of being colorblind, whereas a female only does not even have a chance of it. And that's simply because the male does not have another X chromosome, only has a Y. So the minute a male gets the colorblind trait on the X chromosome, they will be colorblind. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about sex-linked traits. Okay, so hopefully after today you've got a better understanding of how traits can be inherited, and through Punnett squares you can now figure out the probability of why some traits are inherited more often and some traits are not.